Kia ora, I'm Andrew Watkins, and this is Voluntarily. In this video, we are going to take a deeper look at the code that manages goal cards. Goal cards are a way for the Voluntarily platform to prompt people to get things done. They're used when people first sign into the system to help them get started, and they're used to lead organisers and administrators through more complex activities. Here's a list of goal cards that have been assigned to a particular person when they first created their account. So we call these personal goals. They're a specific instance of each goal, and they can be things like get school ready, complete activity, complete your profile. So before I look at the code, I just want to show you where, as an administrator, these goal cards come from. So if you go to admin goals, you can see all of the goals that have been defined in the system. And for testing purposes, you can assign yourself the whole group of cards. If you're a super admin, you can also load a new set of goals from a text file, from a source code file. So let's start by looking at the underlying entities that represent goals. If you're looking at your database, you'll see them listed in the goals collection, and they look a bit like this. Quite straightforward. There's an ID, an image URL for the illustration, an evaluation function which is used to test whether the goal has passed or not, a group identifying what, so that we can collect goals together into groups like getting started for teachers, and some text and description, along with some dates that show the life cycle of the goal. Key value here is the start link. This is where you're taken to when you first click the start button on the goal, or the continue button if you're returning to the goal, having done some work on it before. And in this particular example of completing your profile, it's a link to /my/person, which is a soft link to whoever is logged in's personal profile. So if we look at goal.js in the server API goals folder, you'll see a schema definition that is essentially the same as what we just looked at. Most of the fields are strings. There is a person. No, there is no person field in this because goals are generic and they apply to everyone. And person fields are added when they become a particular personal goal. So we have this concept of a goal group. We don't actually create collections of groups. We simply just have some predefined strings that are associated, allows us to group together various goal cards. So for example, a new volunteer, new opportunity provider, new activity provider, or a new organizational member. The goal controller is a Mongoose Codify controller with just a simple override that allows you to have some query and sort parameters, much as we do for other entities. This load goals function is essentially copies the initialized goal JavaScript file into the database, and goal.init.js contains the source code for the initial set of goals. So we are not currently providing a user interface that allows an editor or an admin to create new goals in the system. They're essentially still added to the code base, but they're loaded into the database at runtime so that they can be made available through a standardized API. And ultimately in the future we may be editing items in the database or adding new goals dynamically. So the next level entity to be interested in is the personal goal. So a personal goal is essentially a join between a person and a goal. So the schema here has a reference to a person and a goal. And then it has a status which represents the life cycle of the goal card, starting at queued when it's first given to you and put into your home page, and then when you click start it becomes active, and when the evaluation test passes it becomes completed. Now, if you don't want to see the card anymore, so you decide that it's getting in the way and it's not relevant for you, you can click this little cross in the corner which marks it as hidden, and it moves it into this hidden state. But as we'll see later, it doesn't stay hidden forever and will keep coming back until you actually make some attempt to complete it. Personal goal schema also tracks dates of each transition between the states, so that we have some idea of how long it's taking you to get through the goals. So the personal goal controller overrides create update, so that we can set the dates on the various state changes. And then when you list the personal goals, we'll call this function evaluate personal goals. So we'll actually test to see whether any of the goals that's been assigned to you have been completed. And then when we send it down to the client, we'll also populate out the person and the goal details. So let's take a look at this evaluate personal goals function. You'll find it in the personal goal library. So this is a bunch of utility functions that allows you to get a personal goal record, add a new one, add a group, to give a whole group of goals to someone, test how old a goal is or an event change is, and then do this evaluation function. So let's take a closer look at this. The whole point of the evaluate function is to allow the actual test of whether a goal is complete to be part of the database entry. And so that allows us to do soft dynamic goal tests. So, for example, changing the degree to which a profile has to be completed for it to be successful. But there's a limit to what can be called in that JavaScript. It can really only do plain standard JavaScript or any functions that we make available in the context of the call. And that's in this context here. So the first thing we'll do is find the list of personal goals that have been assigned to a person, and then we'll map through that list doing these following tests, each of these tests returning a promise, and so the whole function will just wait until they've all completed. But though in reality at any one time there's only 1 or 2, 3 goals being in action at a time. So if the goal is queued or active, we'll call eval on the evaluation code for the goal. Now, eval is a JavaScript function which takes a string and essentially compiles it and then makes it available as a JavaScript function. It's not fantastically safe if people have access to control what goes into that string. But in this particular case, this is all server-side code, and the string is coming from our own code in the database. So I'm happy doing it. So we wait for the evaluation to finish. That tells you that the eval can call functions that may take some time or be asynchronous, like database lookups or API calls. And essentially, it has to return a true or false value that goes to is completed, true if the test passes, and if it's passed, we mark the status of the goal as completed, and we move on. If the goal has already been completed, we then just test to see if the date is up to more than 7 days old, and if it is, we mark it as closed, and then it will disappear from the person's inbox. Similarly, if somebody sets their goal to be hidden, we wait 7 days and then we just move it back to queued. We don't bother doing the evaluation tests if the goal is already hidden or completed. So there's a subscribe file in the personal goals. In fact, it's one of the only ones in the system at the moment. But we're using pub/sub, publish and subscribe, as a mechanism that allows events that take place in one part of the platform to trigger things that can happen in multiple different other parts of the platform without us having to hardwire lots of functions into lots of different modules. So pub/sub is essentially a decoupling function. And what we're doing here is writing a subscribe function that says we are interested in if the topic called person create is ever published, we want to hook into that, and when that happens, we will call add personal goal group to that person. So when we see a new person signed in for the first time, then that piece of code will get published, this topic will get published, and as a result, they'll get given the initial goal group automatically. Similarly, when you become a member of an organization, or if you become the admin of an organization, in this case, we'll also assign you a goal group. And this is how we give new organizational admins, like teachers, the list of things that they need to do to get started. So if we look for publish, we'll see this publish topic function in the pub sub services file, which generates the topic ID as a symbol using the model. So we've got a very generic way of saying when any date we can effectively create a pub sub channel on any database transition that we're interested in. And what we see here, if we're looking at person roots, is that this is where we actually hook into the user into the Express server. There's an after action on create. So when the new create function is called on a person, that we call publish create on the person entity, and that's what results in that topic being issued. And so whenever this shows how a pub sub allows us to hook into transitions in the database or new API calls without us having to hard code lots of dependencies in this section here. So that's about it for goals and personal goals. Let's just take a look at one of the tests that go along with that. So we don't want people to have to write a large amount of complex code in their goal tests. And so we have this goal tests class, which is a list of functions that are made available to the personal goal for evaluation. And so this is where we take in a personal goal, do some sort of action, and return the true or false value. Or in the case of completeness, we return a numeric value for testing. So, for example, if you want to know if a person has a specific badge, you can call person has badge, just passing in the ID of the person and the badge class, and this will return true or false. And in the example we were looking at of whether the profile is complete, we'll simply just get the personal goals ID, person's ID, and call person profile completeness by ID, which will ultimately call person profile completeness, which is this test here. So all we're doing to test if somebody's profile is complete is running through some, not all, of the fields that they can fill in, and testing to see if they've been got a value. And the length of the value, as most of these fields are strings, we're simply putting in some default lengths that we think are reasonable to show that that the field has something meaningful in and isn't just a list of A's. So, for example, the shortest possible valid email is 6 characters. The phone number is 7 characters, and we're expecting 50 characters for the about. And the shortest image URL that we think we can have is 10 characters and things like that. So you'll notice here we're just really testing string length. We're not validating that it is a valid email or URL, or that you wrote in sensible English in the about text or anything like that. Some of that takes place on the form itself, where we're validating it's a valid URL. Here we're just simply saying, has it been filled in? And we return not just a true or false value, but we essentially count the number of fields that got tested and the number that had passing values. And so that allows the evaluation function to decide if, for example, in our case, 85% of the profile is complete, and that's the point at which we'll mark it as done. Person has badge is a very simple function. It simply just looks for that matching class and ID in the badge collection, which in turn was initialized by looking at the external service that's managing badges. And there's a similar org profile completeness that's used for when org admins are filling in their organization details. So that's it for now. I'll see you in the next video. Kia ora.